ethical practitioners of early real estate founded the organization that we know as the National Association of Realtors and created the Code of Ethics. This is their story. Today, every realtor agrees to abide by the Code of Ethics with little thought to the history, so it's hard to understand how revolutionary it was when it was created. So we're going to have to go back in time to see just how remarkable the story of the Code of Ethics really was. The year was 1908. First-class stamps were only 2 cents. Only 14% of homes had bathtubs, and only 8% of homes had telephones. Theodore Roosevelt was president. The flag still had only 45 stars, and only 6% of Americans had graduated from high school. But it was Henry Ford's invention of the assembly line which made automobiles affordable for the middle class that was to have the most far-reaching impact on the nation and the real estate industry. Essentially a horse and buggy world up until then, America suddenly became a mobile society. Personally owned automobiles enabled people to travel across the country or across town. It was now possible for people to live away from the crowded cities. Because 100 years ago, most Americans did not own their own homes, and the cities held the vast majority of the American population. The concept of the suburb hadn't even been born yet, but there were plenty of wide open spaces beyond the crowded cities just ready for development. But more complicated transactions meant more complicated paperwork. Enter the bad guys. 100 years ago, anyone, I mean anyone, could call themselves a real estate dealer. There were men called curbstoners. These unscrupulous individuals would basically set up shop as a real estate dealer on the sidewalk or curbstone and bilk or swindle anyone they could. Apart from misrepresentation, there was outright fraud, and opportunities for fraud were rampant. Selling land they did not hold title to with contracts of sale, buying worthless land, mortgaging it heavily with an accomplice, then selling the mortgage to an unsuspecting buyer, selling the same first trust deed multiple times. These robber barons did not need guns to achieve their purposes, they just used documents. Sellers were easy targets. Property had increased significantly over the generations, and the second and third generation farmers were fatigued with the struggles of farming life and very willing to sell the land to speculators for subdivisions and tract homes. They were vulnerable to unethical dealers that would impress them with a value for their property. Low as it might be, it would still sound significant, and it frequently would be in a net listing arrangement for compensation, which meant the dealer would be compensated the amounts over the low value that was agreed with the seller. Buyers were equally at risk, as this was the era of phony subdivisions. It was cheap and easy to have a subdivision map drawn up on paper with several prime locations, and then lure those with any money into believing they could own such a parcel to finally build a home of their own. They may have been showed an open lot close to a brook and shade trees that was really attractive to city dwellers. Unfortunately, by the time they would realize the swindler dealer they had paid their life savings to either didn't have the authority to sell the property or had sold the same parcel multiple times, or that the sellers' names had been forged on the deeds, it was just too late. The swindlers took what they could from a town, and then they would be long gone before their illegal and nefarious deeds were found out. Most early mortgages were short-term with some kind of balloon payment at the end of the term, or they were interest-only loans. As such, many people were perpetually in debt in a continuous cycle of refinancing their home purchase, which provided the opportunity for private notes to be sold and resold, and sometimes the same note was sold multiple times at the same time. Clever and unscrupulous individuals were not above forging deeds or having deeds signed over to them under false premises. Take one Peter Van Vlissingen, once considered one of Chicago's most prosperous and reputable businessmen, who was arrested for fraud. He had used a newfangled electric light bulb under a plate glass desktop to trace signatures of the owners, the recorder, the notary, even the number of the deed. Upon his arrest, in exchange for speedy justice, which took only a total of 4 hours from arrest, indictment, hearing, and sentencing, he confessed to swindling 25 people out of $700,000, which is equal to about $17 million today, all by selling fraudulent notes. Turns out he needed speedy justice before it was known that he had actually swindled about 100 people, and he had taken them for over $2 million, which is valued at over $42 million today. Real estate practitioners from 7 Midwestern boards met in Duluth in 1907 to talk about forming a national exchange and all their common problems. This group of serious-minded men realized that fraudulent subdivisions, multiple first mortgages, net listings, and many other get-rich-quick schemes were rampant in all parts of the country. Edward S. Judd, the president of the Chicago Board, made the statement that ultimately launched the National Association of Realtors. He said, "There is something about the permanency and stability of land which should give like traits of character to the real estate man." In May of 1908, Mr. Judd welcomed to his city the first National Real Estate Convention, at which the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges was organized. 19 boards from 13 states and one thoroughly organized state association from California met together. Those 120 men who came together there knew what they wanted. They attempted at that meeting only one thing: the organization of a permanent national association. Their first meeting was all about organization and purpose. Committees were set up. A standing ethics committee was appointed to draft ethics recommendations. The board presidents were asked what goals the proposed organization should have. Their replies were first for standards in ethics and business practice, second for exchanging information and statistics on the real estate business, and for all involved to promote real estate ownership and development. Separating themselves from unethical sharks and curbstone brokers was a primary concern. William W. Hannon from Milwaukee was elected the first president in 1909, but actually there was another real first president that served through the 1908 organization year, but for reasons to be explained a bit later, you don't hear much about him. But as we know, it was still 5 years from the formation of the association and the presentation of the first Code of Ethics. Consider the frustrations of a committee from across the country that only met once a year and didn't have conference calls or phones for that matter. No faxes, emails, or tweets to work in between. They had to rely on letters between 14 members to discuss any ideas or changes. Finally, 5 years after the formation of the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges, the members assembled in Winnipeg to adopt their long-awaited ethics of the real estate profession, as it was originally called. President Charles Simpson entertained the motion for adoption of the first Code of Ethics. A committee member stood and said, "The motion is for the adoption of the rules for conduct, and that they be taken as the Code of Ethics of the National Association." After unanimous consent, a delegate arose to say, "Many important things have occurred here today, but none so important as the action we have just taken." And with the adoption of that motion, the shift from "let the public be damned" to "let the public be served" was complete. The first Code of Ethics was just a single piece of paper printed on both sides and folded into thirds. The 1916 convention was important for 2 reasons in NAR history. First, the members adopted their new name, the National Association of Real Estate Boards, which remained the name until the early 70s when the name changed to the current National Association of Realtors. And more importantly, the term realtor was adopted to signify a real estate dealer that was a member of the National Association and who was committed to upholding the Code of Ethics. Charles Chadbourne, the former president of the Minneapolis Real Estate Board, was actually the originator of the term realtor. Recounting the tale of how he came up with the term, Chadbourne explained that the idea came to him in 1915 after seeing a news headline that read, "Real estate man swindles a poor widow." Recently discovered information is that the real estate man referred to in the headline was not an obscure speculator, but it was August H. Frederick, who had served out the first organizing year in 1908 as the first president of the National Association. However, due to the disgrace he brought upon the association after his conviction of swindling a poor widow in 1915, Frederick's name was virtually expunged from official records. Chadbourne wrote in an article in 1922, The word realtor signifies more than merely board and National Association membership. The true realtor is a man of high ideals. He has made the Code of Ethics of the National Association a part of his personal code of honor. He would rather lose a record-breaking commission than violate his own conscience. We'll end our history of the Code with the 4th edition of the Code, adopted in 1924, when the preamble that included the Golden Rule was added. The 14 members of the Ethics Committee wrote the preamble together at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. All told, the Code has been amended 37 times. Realtors serving on the Professional Standards Committee have labored to ensure that the Code is a living document that protects the sellers, buyers, landlords, tenants, and others who place their trust in realtors. And thus the Code was born, and it has served since 1913 as a golden thread, binding realtors together in a common, continuing quest for professionalism through the ethical obligations. Its demand for high standards of professional conduct, protecting the interests of clients and customers, and safeguarding the rights of consumers of real estate services has not and will never change.